They did not hear the scratching at first, only the hush that fell over the village when the gravediggers lowered the lid, and heard it again, tiny claws raking against wood from within a coffin, meant for a 3-year-old child. It was the spring of 1822 when little Matthias Bauer vanished from the Bauer homestead. On the edge of the Bavarian forest, illness had claimed him swiftly. The church bells tolled for a proper burial. The dirt filled his grave, and the villagers moved on, believing the boy safe in his eternal rest. But fate is not always so merciful. 20 years later, when the forest road was widened for the new steam carriage route, workmen unearthed a coffin beneath twisted roots. The wood was ancient, rotting, and yet when they pried it open with iron bars, the air rushed out as though something had been waiting to inhale. Inside lay Matthias, pale and preserved, curled as if asleep. His nails were long, broken. His ribs were thin but unfractured. On his ring finger, a small silver band glinted, an engraving of 2 initials entwined, and a date years beyond any child's promise of marriage. Who had slipped that ring onto his finger? Why had he clawed at the lid until his hands bled? And how had he survived, entombed 3 feet beneath the earth, for 2 decades? The townsfolk who witnessed his resurrection spoke of a silence that followed him home, a silence deeper than any grave. At night, they swore they heard a child's lullaby drifting on the wind, sung backward in a tongue no living person knew. The Bauer family sealed every door, every shutter, yet footsteps padded in the corridor as though someone small crept through the halls. There was no natural explanation. There was only the question that echoed through the empty chapel. Had Matthias clawed his way up to freedom, or had something pulled him back to the world of the living? You are listening to The Withered Ledger. Tonight's tale is not merely one of premature burial and impossible survival. It is a testament to the things that wait in darkness, scratching to be remembered. Greisbach, 1822, a village hushed beneath snow and steeples. You could walk its narrow lanes and hear nothing but the crunch of boots and the slow breathing of cattle behind wooden barns. It was the kind of place where time moved quietly, shaped by harvest, hymn, and habit. Faith stood taller than science, and when the ground froze hard in winter, death was not questioned, it was accepted. In the home of the Bauer family, behind frost-covered panes and near a crooked willow, a child named Elias lay still, 3 years old, hair the color of ash. Just days ago, he had been chasing hens in the yard, cheeks red with laughter. Then came the fever, sudden, high, and merciless. The village doctor, old and near blind, did not linger. He pressed fingers to the child's neck, listened for a heartbeat with a tin funnel, and signed the death paper with a trembling hand. Pneumonia, perhaps, or the winter sickness that had already taken to others. In villages like Greisbach, grief was a shadow no one dared stare at for too long. The burial took place at dusk. The priest read quickly, breath visible in the freezing air. The casket was small, nailed shut with black iron. It was lowered into a shallow grave, as was the custom for children, too deep, and the ground would fight back. Elias' mother, Anna, did not cry. She stared, unblinking, as if her mind had not yet accepted the emptiness of her arms. But that emptiness did not last. 3 nights later, she woke to a sound, soft, repeating, a kind of teek-teek-teek, like nails brushing against wood. She stood in the hallway, candle trembling in her hand, listening. It faded, then came again, from beneath the floor, or beyond it. On the 5th night, she dreamt of Elias. He was trapped in a dark place. He was calling her, but his mouth was sealed shut. Only his eyes pleaded. She told her husband. He told her it was grief, that it twisted the ears and painted ghosts inside dreams. He warned her not to mention it in church. People would talk. They might even say Elias had been cursed. But the dreams grew worse. The sounds grew louder. Scratching, now, small fists, sobbing. By the 7th day, Anna could not bear it. She rose before dawn, wrapped herself in wool, and carried a spade. Out to the graveyard. The ground resisted. She clawed at it, cursed it, pleaded with it. Her fingers bled. Her breath came in clouds. Snow began to fall. But she dug until her husband found her, half frozen, wailing beside a grave that was only halfway open. The priest arrived, stern, disbelieving. He ordered the grave sealed again, said it was sin to disturb the sleep of the dead. Anna was taken home, wrapped in blankets. The neighbors whispered. Some brought her soup. Others crossed themselves when she passed. She never again returned to the graveyard. But the sounds never truly stopped. Not for her. Years later, long after the doctor had died, long after the graveyard had shifted and grown over, men would return to that very plot, not because of dreams, but because of something found, something impossible, and then it would be clear the scratching had never come from Anna's mind, that it had simply not stopped. The year was 1845. Greisbach had changed little. The steeple still stood, crooked and solemn. The winters still arrived early, and the graveyard, now covered in ivy and lean wooden crosses, had grown crowded. Time had swept past the village like a soft wind, rustling nothing but names on tombstones. Few remembered the boy named Elias Bauer. 23 years had passed since his burial. The fever, the coffin, the mother's breakdown, all of it had faded into local folklore. Some still recalled the whispers about the woman who tried to dig up her own son, but no one spoke her name aloud. Anna had died in a sanatorium, far from Greisbach. Her death noted by no one but a clerk who miswrote her name as Elias. But Greisbach's silence was about to be interrupted. It began with an accident. A storm had battered the village for days, and one of the ancient trees in the churchyard had cracked at its base, roots pushing into the old section of the cemetery. It toppled in the night, and by morning, the church groundskeeper, a blunt man named Richter, was tasked with clearing the wreckage. As he hacked through roots and mud, his spade struck something unexpected. Wood, softened, split. At first, he assumed it was just debris, but as he cleared the earth, he uncovered the corner of a small casket, child-sized. The hinges had rusted to near dust. The lid had cracked slightly down the center, and one edge had curled upward just enough to reveal what lay inside. That it was not bones. It was not rot. It was a hand, still mostly intact, with skin like crumpled parchment and fingers curled toward the chest. But it was not the flesh that stopped Richter's breath. It was the ring, a small, delicate silver band, tarnished but unmistakably engraved with the name Elias Bauer. Richter dropped the spade and stumbled back, unsure whether to scream or pray. He ran to the church, raving about a buried child with a ring that should not be there, a ring no child would wear, and certainly not one who died at the age of 3. The pastor, Father Odell, did not believe him, not at first, but curiosity overcame him. He returned to the grave with 2 men from the village. What they found was wrong. The casket was not full of dirt or bone dust. The body had mummified, partially preserved by the cold and the shallow grave. But the real horror was the inside of the coffin itself. The wood was shredded. Deep claw marks ran across the lid, dozens of them. Fingernails were embedded in the splinters. The child had awakened. He had tried to escape. He had died in the dark, alone, screaming with no air. And somehow, a ring had been placed on his finger, a ring sized for an adult, a ring that looked newly made. The pastor ordered the coffin resealed. He told the men to say nothing, that it was a mistake, a family tomb unearthed by the storm, nothing more. But villagers talk, and in Greisbach, secrets never stay buried long. Within days, strange stories resurfaced. An elder named Martha claimed she had known the Bauer boy. She remembered the mother, Anna, and the way she screamed outside the church that week after the funeral. She remembered how no one ever saw the doctor again after that year, how his home had sat empty for decades, windows still boarded from within. And then someone brought forward an old church record, nearly lost, half-eaten by mold. In its pages, a marriage contract appeared, dated 20 years ago. The groom's name, Elias Bauer. No bride was listed. No witness had signed. No ceremony had occurred. Just a contract, a ring order, and a note scribbled by the priest at the time. The boy insists he has returned, that the Lord brought him back, that his bride waits beneath the snow. But how could that be? How could a child buried in 1820 to sign a contract? In 1825, who had created the record? Who had carved his name into silver? And who or what had unearthed a body without decay, in a grave where time itself seemed paused? The villagers were terrified. Some said it was the devil. Others whispered that Elias had been marked from birth, that Anna had made a bargain, in her grief, that she had gone mad not because she imagined her son's voice, but because she truly heard it. Then came the final discovery, the grave beside Elias. It had always been unmarked, empty, supposedly reserved for Anna, though she had died far away. But when the ground was checked, carefully, under pressure from curious townsfolk, they found something else entirely. Another coffin, smaller than expected. Inside, nothing but a folded dress, a doll with a torn eye, and a lock of hair, tied with blue ribbon. Anna had never let go. She had prepared her own resting place, not for herself, but for the daughter-in-law she believed her son would one day bring home. A bride buried without a body, a wedding that never happened, and a ring that should not have existed. The town sealed both graves. The church banned further exhumations, and a sermon was given the following Sunday, not about life, nor resurrection, but about silence, about the need to let the dead stay dead. But silence would not hold for long, because one final rumor spread that winter. A woman, passing through the village, claimed to have seen a young man wandering the edge of the woods near Greisbach, pale, thin, wearing a ring too large for his fingers. When she greeted him, he asked only one question: "Do you know where the snow bride sleeps?" Then he turned and walked into the trees. He left no footprints, and the snow beneath him remained untouched. There is a certain stillness that settles over Greisbach during midwinter. Snow does not fall. It lingers, draped over the branches like a forgotten veil, thick and pale, smothering footsteps, muting the sound of breath. But in the year 1840, there was one house where silence could not reach, the house of the Schmidts. They were not noble, nor cursed. They were farmers, tired, devout people who rose with the bells and slept beneath the scent of firewood. And they had a daughter, Anna. At 17, she was neither plain nor remarkable, but her eyes had begun to carry the faraway look of someone living two lives. She had stopped stitching with the other girls. She did not speak much. She spent long hours staring into the snowy fields, as if waiting. Then one night, she began to speak in her sleep. At first it was soft, a name perhaps, not one her parents recognized. Then came the sobbing, words pressed into the air like frost on glass. "He is cold. He is still down there, but he is breathing," and awoke with blood under her nails. Her parents dismissed it as nerves, or perhaps a chill in the bones. But when she began drawing, they grew afraid. Pages hidden beneath her mattress showed the same thing, over and over. A boy, pale, sunken eyes, dirt clinging to his brow, and always behind him, wood, planks, scratched from within. The local pastor visited. He warned the family not to encourage her fantasies. Her mother prayed harder. Her father threatened to lock her room, but Anna only smiled. "He told me not to be afraid," she said one morning. "He said we are already married. I just have not remembered it yet." It was not long before the rumors reached the village. They said Anna had fallen under a spell, that she was reading the book of dead tongues, that she was cursed by a forest spirit. But Anna never denied anything. She told her best friend, quietly under the cover of a quilt, that she was in love with a man she had never met. "He is trapped in a box," she whispered, "but he speaks louder than any living soul." Her parents forbade her from ever mentioning it again. But Anna found another way. Behind the old church cemetery, where the fence had broken, Anna began leaving things: letters folded tight in wax paper, a white ribbon, a drawing of a ring, always pressed beneath a stone, as if she knew exactly where the wood slept beneath. Sometimes the letters vanished overnight, and then one day, so did Anna. She was not taken. She was not missing. She simply stopped. At sunrise, her mother went to wake her. The fire in her room had long since burned out. The girl was sitting up, her hands resting neatly in her lap, her eyes closed, her lips slightly parted. She was not breathing, but there was no illness, no fever, no trauma to her body. The physician found nothing, no poison, no bleeding, not even a scratch. She had simply fallen asleep and never stirred again. Her mother remembered her last words, barely audible beneath her breath the night before. "He is calling me. I must go before the ring freezes. Anna was buried with that ring, a silver circle. She had never been given. One she claimed was promised to her by the boy from her dreams. The pastor performed the rites. The grave was sealed. But within 3 days, the ring vanished. The soil had not been disturbed. The coffin was locked tight. There was no theft, no sign of intrusion. And yet, the finger that had worn it lay bare. The family wept. But then, 5 years passed, and in 1845, a boy appeared. Or rather, a man, one who should not have existed. Elias, the boy who had been buried at age 3, the boy who had never cried, the boy whose mother swore she had heard scratching. He returned, aged, alive, and with no memory of how he had been released. And on his finger was a ring. Silver, delicate, engraved with letters only Anna could have written. That is when the whispers began again. Some believed Anna had died in order to pull Elias back from death. Others believed Elias had reached through time and taken her soul in place of his. There were even those who claimed they were the same soul, torn apart and returned by a force beyond the veil. But the old gravekeeper, a man who had buried Anna himself, said something else. He remembered that Anna's body had been strange, cold, yes, but never stiff, almost warm, as if sleep had been pretending to be death. He believed Elias had never died, that the scratching had never stopped, that Anna's letters had somehow found their way to him. And that in the dark, in the cold beneath the soil, love had rooted itself deeper than breath. No one could explain the ring, nor could anyone explain why Elias never aged after his return. He walked like a man who had been broken and rebuilt, quiet, aware, half listening to something no one else could hear. Children said he hummed at graves. Old women swore they saw Anna's face in the reflection of his window. And every year, on the night of her death, the silver ring would vanish from his hand. Only to return by morning, colder than snow. One girl, one boy, one promise made between the living and the buried, a marriage never witnessed, a vow never spoken aloud, but something far more ancient had heard it and would not let it be undone. There was no sun that morning, only a dull white glare that stretched across the Bavarian sky like a taut sheet, pulled over the eyes of the dead in the village of Greisbach. Winter had not ended in March. It had only changed its face. Snow fell, like whispers, silent, constant, as if the sky itself was mourning something no one dared name. Elias, now 24, lived on the far edge of the village, in a home that should not have existed. It was a cabin rebuilt from the wreckage of the abandoned church stables. No one had sold him the land. No one had seen him purchase timber. Yet each time someone passed the winding path that led to the old cemetery slope, they saw the house had grown, a new shutter, a lit chimney, curtains that moved when no one was near. And within that house was a room that no one had entered. Locals called it the Snow Bride's Room, not because they had seen a bride, but because children, when walking past on snowy days, would whisper of a white dress hung in the upstairs window, fluttering even when the air was still. Others said they saw footprints, one pair heavy, another too small, circling the house, then disappearing behind it into nothing. Inside, Elias never answered questions. He spoke only when spoken to, and even then, his words had the stiffness of someone recalling lines once rehearsed. His hair was jet black, his hands too pale, and though he had no known occupation, he was never short of food, never asked for coin, and never wore the same coat twice. But the worst thing was his eyes, not their shape or color, but the way they refused to blink during conversation, like they were holding a memory behind them, or waiting for one to return. It was Frau Reinhild who first mentioned the sound. She was 83 and lived directly downhill from Elias's home. Her hearing was poor, but she swore to her granddaughter that each evening, just past midnight, she heard a lullaby float through the snow, a woman's voice, fragile but deliberate, singing something in Latin, or something close to it. She could never write the words, but she hummed the melody, and when she did, the girl went pale, because she had heard it too. On that particular December, the snow came earlier than usual. It sealed the streets and choked the wells. The village went still. One by one, animals stopped responding to calls. Fires burned dimmer. Children began drawing chalk marks on their walls, claiming someone had whispered to them at night, from under their beds or from inside the furnace. All roads led back to the hill. So one night, 5 men, each drunk, each angry, each pretending not to be afraid, took torches and climbed toward Elias's home. They knocked. No answer. They pushed open the door, unlocked, oddly warm inside. The place smelled of dry roses and soil. The main room was empty. The floorboards beneath their boots creaked, not from weight, but like they were exhaling. One of them called out. That was when the door upstairs opened. The men stood frozen, as a soft glow filtered down the staircase, like moonlight filtered through cloth. Then came the sound, a creaking floor above, but rhythmic, like dancing. Two of the men turned and ran. The others climbed. Each step they took made the house groan louder. By the time they reached the landing, one man collapsed, vomiting on the rug. The second called for him to rise, but then noticed something strange about the hallway. All 4 doors had carvings, not new, not old, but human. Scratches, shallow, deliberate, and vertical, like someone had dragged their fingernails down the wood again and again, not once, not in anger, but over time, repetition, desperation. The 3rd door on the left was open. Inside was the Snow Bride's room. No one ever fully described what they saw. The only man who survived that night, Dieter San, the village butcher, refused to speak for years. When pressed, he only said, she was not dead, but she was no longer a bride. Then he would weep. What they found inside was a bed covered in lilies, all fresh, all white, and atop the bed, a dress untouched by dust, yet brittle at the sleeves. The walls were covered with pages, letters, perhaps, all pinned like specimens. On each page, a child's drawing, a coffin with a heart scratched in red. The final page bore a name, Anna. The men never found Elias, nor did they find a body. But when they descended the stairs, they saw a new portrait had been hung in the front room. A young couple, she in a white dress, he in a black coat. They both smiled, but neither had eyes. And in the corner of the painting, small and barely visible unless one squinted, were the Latin words, resurrexit, per caritatem. He rose through love. By spring, the house was gone, not torn down, but vanished, as if the snow had never melted, only swallowed. Children were warned never to sing lullabies past midnight. Old women no longer planted lilies. And, to this day, in Greisbach, if you find a ring buried in the dirt, you return it. Immediately, because once it fits your finger, it never wants to come off, and it does not belong to you. It belongs to the bride, the one still waiting in a house, no longer on any map. By the time the first snow fell in 1851, the village of Greisbach no longer whispered. It warned. The bell tower that once called for weddings or rang out in grief now swung for only one reason: to signal his passing, a slow, single toll. Not to announce, not to celebrate, but to mark the movement of something that should not walk among the living. Elias. His face remained untouched by time. A young man's skin, pale as winter moonlight, stretched as smooth across cheekbones that looked carved rather than grown. But there were signs that his body was forgetting what it meant to be alive. His fingernails darkened with every week, curling thick like bark. His shadow no longer moved like his limbs. It moved slower, as if dragging behind. The priest who had rebaptized Elias when he returned, the one who insisted he be cleansed, reborn, made pure, was now dead, found stiff in his sleep, a crucifix clenched in one hand, and the other pointing toward the chapel wall. Scratched into the altar above him were letters, Latin, but reversed, etched not by a knife, but by fingernails. No one would speak the words aloud, but many remembered Anna's dreams, words that echoed backwards, symbols that made sense only in reflection. The village had seen omens before, but none that remained, none that returned every 7th night to stand above the dirt from which they came. Every Sunday, without fail, Elias walked to the plot where he had once been buried, not to mourn, not to pray, but to stand, to listen, as if the soil still spoke to him, or waited for him. And with each visit, the earth beneath his feet stirred less, the bell tolled slower, The children walked faster when passing the old road, near the cemetery, and the old pastor, the one who had once forbidden Elias' mother from digging up her son, had stopped preaching altogether. He no longer wrote sermons. He sketched. Pages of strange diagrams now filled his study. Human anatomy twisted into wrong shapes, rib cages folded like wings, lungs shaped like open mouths, bodies that did not breathe in air, but memory. He called it the stillborn cycle, a theory that those buried too early, in confusion, in panic, in silence, never truly passed on, that some souls remained caught, waiting for permission to continue what death interrupted. Elias did not eat, did not sleep. He spoke only when spoken to, and even then, only in fragments. Some said he remembered nothing. Others claimed he remembered too much. Then came the storm of 1851. It cracked open roof tiles, tore chimney bricks, and buried livestock in snow before morning. Amid the chaos, a farmer's daughter vanished, a child of 4. No screams were heard, no tracks found, no struggle. In the mud, just one thing, near the edge of the cemetery wall, a tooth. Tiny, clean, and placed, not dropped, not torn out, but left with deliberate care on a smooth flat stone, as though returned to the soil like a seed. The mother wept that Elias had stared at her child for weeks, that he stood outside their fence after dusk, that she heard him humming lullabies in a tongue no one in Bavaria had spoken in centuries. This time, the village did not hesitate. They did not speak of forgiveness, they spoke of closure. And they chose burial. A real one. No trial, no blessing. They found him in the chapel, on his knees, not at the pew, but behind the altar, the spot where the reverse Latin had once been scratched. He was not praying, his head tilted toward the stone, lips moving in a wet murmur, a voice, like someone drowning beneath water. It was not German, it was not Latin, it was not human. They chained his wrists with iron. His eyes remained lowered. He did not resist. They marched him out of town, not to the graveyard that was consecrated ground, and some feared it would not hold him this time. They took him deeper, beyond the village, past the black pine trees, to a pit that had not been spoken of in generations, a sunken place, a circle of dead trees, none of them bearing leaves, not even in spring. It was once used by monks in the early centuries, a hollow, earthen mouth the locals called Der Erstland, the first maw. The ground was soft. Waiting. They placed him in the center, among salt and nails and crumbled stone. One villager, the blacksmith who had forged the very chains, stepped forward to meet Elias' eyes before they covered him. He never spoke of what he saw, but his face went pale, and when asked later what Elias looked like in that final moment, he only muttered one word. Tired. Not angry, not afraid, just tired. As if he had been buried like this before. As if he knew how this would end. They buried him not with a cross, but with the broken shard of Anna's headstone. The name on the stone had faded, but they remembered it. The snow covered the pit, the tolling of the bell stopped, the village held its breath, and for 2 years, silence, until the thaw of 1853. It was a bitter spring. The ground melted too quickly, leaving behind sinkholes and broken paths. A shepherd, wandering with his flock, noticed the dead circle in the woods had shifted. Part of the pit had caved in, not completely, but just enough to show something pale beneath the soil. They called for help. They dug carefully. Nobody. No clothes, just a cluster of nails, hardened, curled inward, arranged in the shape of a child's fist, and beside them, a second tooth, not from a child, from a young woman, Anna's tooth, and a single imprint in the earth, not a footprint, not a hand, a knee, as if someone had been kneeling in the dark, even after the dirt had been thrown. On top, Greisbach no longer speaks of Elias. His mother's home was abandoned, then swallowed by vines. The chapel has no altar now. It was torn down brick by brick and replaced with bare stone. But when children pass the old circle in the woods, they are told not to sing, not to speak, not even to breathe too loud, because silence is what he listens for. Because some burials are not endings, they are rehearsals, and some names, like Elias, do not belong to the living or the dead. They belong to what waits beneath us, still listening, still not finished,